From more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christies.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewbs and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into all the stories that have got you talking today. MPs, should they be marking their own homework? Of course not. But according to them, in a Commons vote today, the answer is yes. What on earth are they thinking? And unions have warned that care homes face closure if the 60,000 unvaccinated care workers are forced to leave the profession. I wonder, do you think you should lose your job just because you don't want to have the COVID vaccine? And when it comes to badly behaved kids, at least according to Britain's so-called strictest head teacher, we need a return to discipline. Do we? All of that tonight to come on Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewbs, and my panel, who I will introduce you to in a moment. But first, the news headlines.
Hello, I'm Tamsin Roberts. Here are the latest headlines. Former Tory Cabinet Minister Owen Paterson says he now has the opportunity to clear his name after avoiding suspension through a Commons vote. The Standards Committee had recommended a 30-day ban for breaching lobbying rules. He says the last 2 years have been hell. MPs voted to approve an amendment on the rules surrounding parliamentary conduct. Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner has described the result as a disgrace. The British skipper caught up in the post-Brexit fishing row has been told he can leave France immediately. A French court has also ruled that the captain of the Scottish trawler, John D. Ward, does not have to pay a deposit for the release of his boat. The UK's financial companies have been given 2 years to submit their plans to achieve net zero targets. Rishi Sunak told the COP26 conference they'll be checked against standards set out by green industry leaders. The Chancellor says the role financial firms play will be vital in tackling climate change.
6 years ago, Paris set the ambition. Today, in Glasgow, we're providing the investment we need to deliver that ambition. Everyone, everywhere, having fresher water to drink, cleaner air to breathe, better insulated homes in which to live. That's the vision we're asking you to commit to. That's the opportunity we're asking you to invest in. And that's the work that we're asking you to begin today.
The head of South Western Rail has praised the driver involved in a collision near Salisbury on Sunday, saying his actions prevented a much more serious incident. Managing Director Claire Mann says the driver, who remains in hospital, reacted correctly under the circumstances. Investigators say the train ran 220 metres past a red signal before hitting another train. The driver attempted to apply the brakes, but the wheel slipped on the tracks and the train didn't stop as it should. The number of migrants crossing the English Channel has topped 20,000 this year. That's double the total for the whole of 2020. Yesterday, UK authorities rescued or intercepted 456 people who had navigated busy shipping lanes from France in small boats. Football fans have been paying their respects to former Scotland boss Walter Smith in Glasgow. Thousands of people gathered outside the Ibrox Stadium to see the funeral cortege go by. The ex-Rangers and Everton manager died last week at the age of 73. Research shows women diagnosed with breast cancer at a young age have a greater chance of it spreading to other parts of the body. A global study on the disease found those under the age of 35 appear to be more at risk than those aged 50 or over. Around 1,000 women in the UK die from secondary breast cancer every month. A 4-year-old girl has been found alive and well after disappearing from a campsite in Western Australia 18 days ago. Police released this footage of the moment. Officers discovered Cleo Smith in a locked house in the coastal town of Carnarvon during a raid early this morning. She had vanished from her family's tent. A man from the area is in custody. Spain has cancelled all flights to and from the island of La Palma because of heavy ash from an erupting volcano. Authorities on the Canary Island are telling people who live near it to stay indoors. They've also halted school classes. The volcano has been spewing lava, ash and gases for more than 6 weeks, and more than 7,000 people have been evacuated from their homes. Well, that's all your news for now. Let's get back to Dewbs & Co.
Joining me for the show tonight is my panel, Laura Dodsworth, writer, photographer and filmmaker, and Nikki Hodgson, who's the author and journalist, and Alan Miller, co-founder of the campaign group Open for All. Good evening to all of you. And you know the drill by now. Sean, you told me last night I never say my catchphrase anymore. If you're watching tonight, this is for you. Because what I used to say is, if it matters to you, it matters to me, and that is indeed very true. So I want to know your thoughts on everything that we discussed tonight. You can get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. Of course, you can always get in touch on Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram. We're absolutely everywhere. You can even, by the way, watch us on YouTube now if you don't already. And if you are watching that way, hello to you. But first, it's COP26. I'm going to ask you a question now. Do get in touch and tell me the truth. It's 12 days, this conference, and every night I start with an update. I think we're on day 3 now, so that means we've got quite a few days left. How are you feeling about COP26? Are you still engaged? Are you a little bit bored? When you hear me open my show with COP26, do you go, yes, it's all about the climate? Or do you go, Dewbs, what are you doing? Move to something else. Get in touch and let me know. But nonetheless, today at the COP26 was all about money, finance. And by the way, they make me laugh when we talk finance. What we really mean is, what are we going to be spending on climate change? Rishi Sunak has spoken of the UK's vision to help rewire the global financial system for net zero. He was outlining plans on sovereign green bonds and corporate climate disclosures. Let's have a listen.
It's easy to feel daunted by the scale of the challenge that we face. By sea levels rising, droughts and wildfires spreading, people forced out of their homes. But I look around this hall and I feel optimism. Why? Because this is the first COP to bring together so many of the world's finance ministers, businesses and investors with such a clear common purpose. The will is there. At least 80% of the global economy has committed to net zero or carbon neutrality targets. Our challenge now is to deploy the investment we need to deliver those targets around the world.
There you go. Well, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, is there in Glasgow. Darren, good evening to you. What have we missed today? What's been the latest?
Yeah, so really interestingly, as you say, today's been an issue of finance. The Chancellor trying to make the argument, essentially, Michelle, overall, that this massive effort that's going to have to be made to meet all these climate change ambitions that political leaders get set out needs money. And that money cannot simply come from the state. It simply cannot just involve the efforts of individuals, but private companies too. And so that's why he was announcing today that actually $130 trillion worth of assets, that is an eye-watering sum of money, have committed themselves to aligning to becoming more green in what they do in the years and decades to come. He's also really interestingly and somewhat controversially as well talking about legally potentially forcing companies to set out how they are becoming more environmentally friendly. Many suggest that is a step too far for the government. Many will also say that is going to put extra burdens, bureaucracy on private businesses, and those costs will get passed on to consumers. But as I say, Rishi Sunak's argument is this has to be a collective effort. In the end, I think the one point everyone can agree on is none of these targets are going to be met unless there is an awful lot of money. Like everything in life, you have to follow the money, and that is why today in some ways was quite important. It wasn't just him, the Governor of the Bank of England was here as well, Michelle, alongside people like Janet Yellen, the US Treasury Secretary, so pretty big names. And speaking of big names and away from finance, we had a little bit of glamour as well. Today we had Prince Charles, Stella McCartney and Leonardo DiCaprio meeting to talk about the fashion industry and what it can do. Now, fashion actually does contribute quite a lot to greenhouse gases in the way that clothes are made in various parts of the world and also how disposable they are. We've all got used to kind of actually not necessarily mending clothes, but simply going out and buying new ones. And the effort that they were trying to make essentially was to try and make us as individuals conscious that maybe we should just wear clothes a bit more often rather than immediately go out and buy them, but also making the industry recycle and reuse and refashion clothes that they've not currently done in the past.
Interesting. All right, Darren McCaffrey, thank you very much for that update. Got to say, my ears pricked up there when he says we're being, the glamour of the fashion industry, Prince Charles. Is that the glamour of the fashion industry, the glamour, the glitz and the glamour? And also when people say about wearing clothes, re-wearing clothes, all these famous people tell us, don't they, that we need to re-wear our clothes. I don't know what world they live in because most ordinary folk do indeed re-wear their clothes. Nikki, your thoughts on this whole COP26?
Yeah, gosh, well, like you say, Michelle, it's only day 3 and it feels like you can't get away from this as any kind of discussion. I suppose what I thought today about the Chancellor's speech was that it was, as always with Rishi, very positive, sounds great, he delivers it brilliantly, but it's always very poor on detail. And, there was this very important line in it, which was we're going to work towards a mandate. So at this stage, what he's saying is we're not going to force anyone with the law to change their business, but we are potentially going to work towards that. Now, the reality is, if you're a struggling small business, maybe, after COVID, after Brexit, and you're being told, well, we want you to do these things, but you don't have to do them, are you going to do them? Most people can't afford at this point in time. Yes, it's fine for the big corporates, but they've kind of been doing some of these green initiatives anyway because it's good for their brand. So I feel like what's going to happen is the gap between the businesses that can already afford to do it and those that can't is going to widen. And then we're going to end up with a kind of two-tier society when it comes to who's apparently green and who's not.
Interesting. And I'm not really a big fan of mandates, and we'll talk about vaccine mandates in just a moment, I'm sure, but I'm not a big fan of mandates. But I have to say, when we have all this conversation about recycling, etc., I do just think, well, why don't you just mandate producers to create stuff with recyclable packaging? Why is it my responsibility to separate everything into God only knows how many bits and pieces, taking out the little bit of a plastic bit on an envelope because that can't be recycled, or a coffee cup that's got a liner that can't? Why is it my job to just mandate producers to do stuff that's environmentally friendly? But maybe I'm just lazy, Alan.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think that one of the things is that the obsession with the individual and consumption is a problem, because where we know the impacts are always at the industrial level, so that everyone sorting out their own rubbish and then getting fined by the council is not only a problematic diversion, it also ends up being an authoritarian impulse on ordinary people. But what's interesting is that in the discussion, the COP26, you think, OK, well, we know that we're reliant on carbon at the moment, and actually what we're talking about with, let's get it real, ordinary people, living standards, working conditions. If one wanted to have a robust kind of approach to transform things and use nuclear energy, for instance, as they do 65% in France and others in Sweden. Everyone's stepping away from that now, right? They're stepping away from that rather than expanding it. And this notion that you have sustainable development is an oxymoron. Development and innovation is the way to transform things, whether it's to do with resources being depleted. The only way you create new resources is through technology and innovation. That changes our relationship to the resources around us. And I think that rather than saying let's have virtue signalling and talking about readjusting things to say things in a certain way, we should think about how technology, our human capacity to create, can make things better around without imposing all these costs and restrictions on ordinary people and business.
On the ordinary man. Laura, as well, the climate content pledge, where all these people come together. I think it's about 12 of the biggest broadcasters, basically. They're pledging now that they're going to use their platforms, their content to educate people about the climate crisis. Your thoughts?
Oh, I've got lots of thoughts on this.
I knew you would.
But, you know, the reason that they're doing this is because of the big thing that Rishi Sunak hasn't talked about today.
This is a list, by the way, of some of these broadcasters and brands that are coming together that you can see on your screen.
12 major UK brands. But the reason they're all having to coordinate and work with the government's behavioural scientists is they're asking the British taxpayer to swallow a very bitter pill, and we haven't yet been told how big this pill is. So one thing Rishi Sunak didn't talk today is the cost to the householder. So going net zero is going to cost 1.4 trillion, and the government is obstinately refusing to say what this is going to cost households. They say this can't be worked out. Well, we're going to have to switch to electric vehicles and change our boilers. We'll have increased taxes, and products and services will cost more because we're going to be switching the means of production. And they won't tell us what it will cost. So how will we be persuaded to make these huge changes to our lifestyle where basically only the well-heeled will go on holiday, and they want us to switch insects for meat?
You don't think it's that bad, surely, that only the well-heeled can go on holiday?
Yes, I do think it's that bad, yes.
Really?
Yes, I do, yeah. I think that
You're nodding. Do you think that?
I think the cost of net zero is going to be astronomical. If you think about just changing, for instance, your boiler, if you want to switch a new gas boiler in your house, it might be 1,000, 1,500, you know, it varies. If you change for a ground source heat pump, you could be looking up to 25,000. If you want to switch to a heat air pump, that's going to be about £10,000, and they don't work very well. That's just the boiler. An electric vehicle is £25,000. I've never spent that much money on a car myself. I think this will immiserate poor and working class people.
But your average Joe that only earns probably less than £30,000, they're just not going to have this in them to spend £10,000 on a boiler. So they're just not going to do it. You can't force it. You can't say to them, well, this is a mandate, and if you don't switch your heat pump, you're going to prison. Because if someone's not got, say, 10 grand, they've not got 10 grand.
No, but the problem is they're going to be priced out of living, aren't they? I think this is what's disturbing about this, is we have to make this change. But like we said, you know, like Alan said, it's business that is causing actually the majority of the pollution, the majority of the carbon issues. It's not individual people. So unfortunately, the cost will be passed on to us as consumers, and the poorest people will be priced out of living. But what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is the end of the human race, the end of the planet. So, you know, if you got to get apocalyptic about it, but that's the end game.
No, so if I don't change my boiler, it's the end of the planet.
It's not from 0 to 60, is it? You know, it's like there's a long trajectory of things that have to happen in between. But they'll get to a point where once, you know, the planet is heated up a certain amount, once people can't afford heating, what happens to those people? You know, if you can't afford to drive, you can't afford heating, you can't afford good insulation, we're going to start to end up with a very tiered society of people that can afford to have a good standard of living and people that can't. And that will cause poverty, and it will actually cause some deaths as well.
Well, I think this is where we need to have actual debates rather than these straplines and platitudes that we're presented with, because on the one hand, you see things like even in London with the ULEZ passing and people having to go into early retirement or not be able to afford those kind of costs. But actually, this conversation that this is all what's happening. I remember taking my son to school a long time ago, and when he came out, he said, "Daddy, I hate cars." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Well, they're making us drown." And when these broadcasters tell us very kindly they're going to educate us, that's not a debate and a discussion about the merit of something. It's not looking at the different things that can be done, the cooling and the heating.
What is it then?
What that is them deciding to say this is what the narrative is and you need to be educated, and we're going to use storytelling to tell you how we think you should know it, you silly people. And I think it's very, very insulting. We've seen a bit of that trajectory in the last 18 months, if we're honest, in my opinion. This idea that there's a contempt for the public. There isn't an open discussion about thrashing out these ideas. Experts some experts from some fields tell us there seems to be this new arc of a kind of, this is how it is, this is what we're going to do. The idea that you thrash out these options of what can be done and the merit of them seems to disappear, and then the great and the good sort of make these declarations and tell us how things are going to be. And I think it's utterly undemocratic, actually, and it's very problematic.
Yes, and talking about the storytelling, because that's what you're asking me, Michelle. So all these media brands have signed up to a content pledge, which means they're going to increase their coverage and the quality of their coverage. But Sky and the UK government's Behavioural Insights team produced a report about exactly how Sky would do that, which contains some quite prescriptive advice about news segments, changes to drama, documentaries and advertising in order to influence the public.
Well, are they going to influence you? I'm going to leave this topic there in just a second. I've got to say what makes me laugh is how all these people, these VIPs, the so-called glamorous people, the world leaders, they stand on the stage telling us everything that we're going to have to do, all these kind of things that we're going to have to sign up for, and all of the kind of dire situation that we're in, whilst their limousines are kind of idling outside, whilst their private jets are kind of chilling out on the runways. It just makes me laugh. I think there was suggestions as well that one of the European bosses, who was it, Ursula von der Leyen, she apparently flew to the conference by private jet. Her journey was apparently just 31 miles. Now, I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to be a hypocrite. If someone said to me, Michelle, you've got a journey to make, do you want to get on a bus, or do you want me to charter a private jet? I'm not going to be a hypocrite about this, I'll be honest. I'd take the private jet as well. But the difference is, I'm not sitting here telling you that you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to do the other. So I do think the hypocrisy of some of these people is quite mind-blowing. Anyway, I'm going to take a quick break. But just before I do, I asked you, what do you think to COP? Stuart says no, he can't and won't engage with all this COP stuff because he says it scares him about what it's going to cost him financially. Adrian has been in touch saying, I'm sick of hearing about it all talk and no action, he says. And I've got to say, I'm looking through lots of the emails that you've sent through. I'm struggling to find one, quite frankly, that says about how much you like hearing about COP. Someone's been in touch saying, I don't want to keep hearing about COP. If it continues, I'm going to boycott GBNews, he says, for the next 12 days. Well, don't do that, because the whole conference was 12 days. We're already on day 3, so if you do 12 days, you're going to miss it. Anyway, I'm going to take a quick break. When we get back, we'll be talking about lots of stuff, including, do you think you should basically have to leave your job if you won't take the COVID vaccine? No jab, no job, apparently not just in care home workers, but soon to be in the NHS. That's coming up.
On Brazier at 8, as the number of illegal migrants reaching Britain by boat breaches the 20,000 mark, are we really going to see 4 or 5 times that number next year? Britain's strictest head teacher says adults mustn't be afraid of chiding kids. Tell that to the 83-year-old pushed over for telling a teen not to ride on the pavement. And the Great Spike of Northumberland plans for Britain's tallest sculpture to honour the life of Queen Elizabeth. That's Brazier from 8.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, 4 to the point.
Welcome back. Now, the COVID vaccination, you cannot go a day, an hour, sometimes a minute without having conversations about them. Personally, you can have your jab if you want it. If you don't, you can have 2, 3, you can have 10. Have as many as you want. However, when it comes to your job, what do you feel about the situation where people are going to be told that if you don't have this vaccination, you can't continue in your job? The reason I ask you this is because unions are warning a social care crisis could be on the cards as 60,000 staff face losing their jobs if they don't get this vaccine. This, of course, comes at a time when there's about 100,000 vacancies in that sector. And to add to this, the UK government is set to announce mandatory vaccines for the frontline NHS workers. I mean, I laugh because I personally, I don't agree with this. You probably won't be surprised to hear that if you follow this story regularly. When it comes to the NHS, the intention is to look to introduce them from April for NHS workers in England. The deadline for care workers, of course, is later this month, the 11th. Alan, your thoughts on this?
I think it's really problematic that you have mandatory no jab, no job. I think if you want to convince about the efficacy of something and win hearts and minds, then fair enough. A large proportion of people in Britain have had their vaccinations. This idea that then you make a mandatory imposition is ludicrous, right? On the one hand, it's going to intensify the real difficult problems we've got already, that care homes have been so terribly treated throughout lockdowns, and like with the NHS, with the backlog we've got. So it's going to intensify all those problems. And you actually increase vaccine hesitancy as it happens. And this is the problem, that there isn't an attempt to engage with the public to really win hearts and minds for those that aren't there. And what about all the people that have had COVID already that then have immunity that's much higher than the vaccination, as we've seen from many reports now? So all round, this is very problematic. And this attempt to constantly threaten and impose and nudge and then sack people is absolutely outrageous, in my opinion.
I've got to say, I agree with Alan, but there'll be people, and indeed there are people already messaging in. So Paul, for example, he's just messaging as I'm speaking, saying you should be jabbed if you want to work in the care industry. It's taking precautions for others' safety. If you're in the care industry, I mean, I guess it's different to, I don't know, say being a painter and decorator. If you're a carer, you've specifically chosen to care for people's health. Do you think, therefore, that you should have that vaccine if you're one of those workers?
I suppose I don't really understand why you wouldn't want to. I mean, so not that I don't understand the argument against having the vaccine from a liberty perspective, that I completely understand. But is that the reason why so many care workers feel that way? Because, you know, is it that you've decided to put your liberty before somebody else's life?
It's not just about liberty, is it? People will contact and say, well, hang on a second. A, I've had COVID, so I've got the antibodies already. B, I'm not at high risk of serious illness from COVID, so I don't want this.
But the people you're looking after are the most vulnerable in our society. So from my perspective, the fact that...
And they'll be double, triple jab.
Well, hopefully they will be, but maybe some of them have got underlying health issues or other problems that means that they can't be. So it has to kind of be on a case-by-case basis.
So before I bring Laura in, what would you rather? If you had, let's just say, an elderly relative in a care home, would you rather them be cared for by someone that's not had the COVID vaccine or not be cared for by anyone at all? Because if you've got a staff shortage, you're not going to be cared for very well.
Well, that's a good point. 60,000 workers we're going to lose potentially if this mandate, when this mandate comes in. You know, we've had a problem with the care sector for eons. So I suppose what I'm just very, very curious about is why is it that people that understand the benefits of looking after people feel very strongly about not having this vaccine, and why particularly in this sector compared to other sectors? Because it is a sector where you put others before yourself.
Well, if you're one of those people, if you're a care worker or maybe an NHS worker and you haven't had your jab, and, you know, Nikki's saying there she don't understand why you wouldn't, get in touch and tell Nikki why you wouldn't do that. Laura, your thoughts?
Well, let's go first of all to the public health case. If you have been vaccinated, you have the protection it gives you. This is a vaccine which mitigates your symptoms. It reduces your risk of severe illness. It does not stop transmission or onward infection. So everybody who's been offered a vaccine has been able to have it and have the protection it gives them. If a care worker chooses not to have the vaccine, basically they put themselves at risk and not others. So that's the first thing.
But you said about transmission.
That's
not true, actually, Laura, because there was the Lancet report this week that came out and said that there's no difference in terms of contracting the vaccine from an unvaccinated or a vaccinated person. But the difference comes in that period where you are particularly kind of highly contagious is shrunk if you've had the vaccine. So there is a difference there, and that is important. The other thing to say is that if a care worker becomes sick, then they potentially impact the care that is given to the person that they care for because they're not available to care for them. So if they could have had a vaccine and kept themselves safe, isn't that something to consider?
I think it's still really early to be completely clear about the science. There are conflicting reports all the time about the window of infection and how much it reduces onward transmission. But if I could just continue on the public health case, we know that there's going to be a huge staff shortage. It could be 60,000. That is going to lead to a huge crisis in care homes, which is also going to put more pressure on hospitals. And then the next crisis we're going to face is the 100,000 NHS staff who are still unvaccinated. It's almost as if we're hurtling towards the unsustainable pressure
Plan
on the
B.
NHS, which is going to trigger Plan B. Basically, we're going to end up with a worse health problem by having short-staffed care homes and hospitals. So if you're taking a holistic view of how to keep care alive this winter, it shouldn't mean to sack people. Remember that a lot of those people who haven't been vaccinated will have had COVID and therefore already be immune. And things like their religious exemptions or any reasonable objections they've got are just being rode roughshod over. What's to incentivise them to stay in that industry versus any other industry where they can have bodily autonomy?
Brian in Kent, by the way, has been in touch saying these jabs absolutely must be mandatory. How hypocritical not to want to protect the people you care for and themselves from sickness.
I mean, one of the things we've seen, if you see in America, it's playing out now, and the irony of telling firefighters who choose not to have this as a mandatory that somehow they are risking lives, as they spent the whole of the pandemic and the lockdowns rescuing, saving people's lives. We've seen now in Chicago that they've had to have a stay on this actual mandatory vaccinations for police workers. We've got municipal workers and others who are out on the streets and they're going to lose many.
But while you're talking, if you don't mind, I want to interrupt, but I don't. But whilst you're talking, I'm going to, because one of the things that I found quite fascinating and that gets very little mention, I notice, on other broadcasters, is just how many protests are taking place at the moment right across the world against a lot of this vaccine mandation. So whilst we're talking, if you don't mind, I am just going to start just showing some of these protests in various different countries. I think the first one I'm going to show is New Zealand.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah, so, I mean, basically, around the world, people have been protesting. These are, for instance, in New York, you had over 14,000 municipal workers, police officers, first responders. These are all people that have been in the thick of it. Many of them have had COVID. And they've got high immunity. That seems to not be a discussion anymore, with an obsession around this. So the idea that somehow they're being irresponsible or causing a threat to someone is a moot point. It's being ignored. And there's this kind of impulse to threaten and dispense with people that are highly trained and really experienced that can bring enormous value.
This is Australia, by the way. I've got to say, I do think that in some places, some of the authorities have lost the plot. This is Italy, this one. Some of the ways that some of these protesters, etc., have been treated, I find it quite alarming.
Well, interestingly as well, the mayor of Trieste, after we've seen weeks of people bravely coming out in Italy and in Trieste, the port workers and citizens, the mayor suddenly decides to impose a ban and mandatory mask wearing outside for some reason that's got nothing to do with science or anything else, as though somehow you can terrify or threaten people to not execute their democratic rights to say things. It's shocking and outrageous. And actually, it's great that you're showing it here because it's kind of very few places. It's remarkable to me that all around the world these things have been happening and so few of the media broadcast outlets are actually showing it. You know, we've seen the situation where almost it's like a blanket ban of seeing. Some of them have been remarkable, huge, weekly. If you look at the Gilets jaunes and now come back out in France, all across Italy, we've seen things in Australia, and, you know, where people have been shot at with rubber bullets and being attacked and things like that. and you just wonder why this doesn't make news, right? And so it's really important that you're showing it. It's also really important that with all of these things, we get to have an open, rigorous discourse and debate about it. And it isn't just threats and then execution of these things without proper parliamentary scrutiny about the efficacy of them and then debate with the public. It's really problematic.
But, you know, the threats are actually worse because now the proposed vaccination schedule to be mandatory for NHS workers is not just the COVID jab, but also the flu jab. I mean, that would have been unthinkable just a couple of years ago.
And Yvonne has got in touch as well, saying everyone, including all those people on the panel with you, Michelle, they would be quite happy for all of these care workers, etc., looking after people with COVID last year without a vaccine and often without no PPE. Now they're essentially, in Yvonne's mind, be treated like criminals. Roy has been in touch saying, I wouldn't put my parents into any home unless all of the staff have been vaccinated. Somebody has also just messaged telling me that they're a care worker and their reasons why, but so many of you are coming in that I've just lost it. I'm going to find it because one of you have definitely messaged in telling me that you're working and explaining, because I did say to Nikki I was going to get someone to do that. Someone will find it for me and I'll read it out in a second. But yeah, I do, and I also find it a bit of a slippery slope, because I think when you start trying to mandate these vaccinations and say, right, you can't do this if you don't have this. There was a company, I'm sure it was in Germany, and I'm sure if you will correct me if I'm wrong, that's talking about, for example, having separate canteens for people that are vaccinated and those that are not. And I think, how are we accepting this? How is anyone thinking these things are okay?
Well, that's basically a new form of segregation. We don't want to go anywhere near there. But actually, in response to this story, although I feel strongly that people should have the vaccine, I don't actually believe that you should mandate it. I still believe it should be a choice, because the point is that the minute you say one group of people, however small, have to have it, then you might as well say it for everybody. There's kind of no difference there.
I was just going to throw in as well that if you look at what's happening in Wales, they narrowly got in on a 28 to 27 vote in the Senate with one technical hitch, passing vaccine passports. Now they're discussing rolling them out everywhere else. The idea of a mandatory vaccine ends up becoming, if you use vaccine passports and you need them to access everyday life, to go to venues, to participate, then we have a situation where that's imposed as well. And that's why we actually, I'm a signatory of the togetherdeclaration.org, but basically encouraging the public and others to get engaged and challenging that. But there's going to be a protest on Tuesday where the vote's going to be had at the Senate, and people in Cardiff are going to go there and challenge. But we're faced with the situation, as we know, in Scotland as well. Not only is it really damaging to business, creating a lot of chaos, a loss in revenue, and businesses that already experience an enormous amount of problems, lots of losses, but also the very notion of our ability to move freely, our civil rights, the idea that security or other personnel can say, show me your health papers, the most intimate of our privacy details. And actually, with something that doesn't actually have any health benefits, right? That's the irony. Not that even if it did, I don't think it would be acceptable. But, you know, the whole idea that you have a vaccine passport and then somehow that means that something can't be transmitted or it keeps you safe.
No, but
we've seen is not the case.
You can't say there's no health benefits to having the vaccine. The vaccine has obviously brought down COVID rates in the world.
Vaccine passport.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, there is a difference. Yeah, and I think, of course, it's clear to say that there is absolutely a vaccine benefit. That's clear to see in terms of hospitalisation rates, hasn't there? But I think the key is, I think the mandates of this is the bit that really get people going. I'm going to take, I was going to take a break, actually, but I'll keep going. Alan has got in touch saying, I would not want Michelle Dewberry owning a care home that my relatives that were in. Callous is the best description for her. Freedom not to get a vaccine for care workers. It's not freedom, it is an abuse of freedom. Well, luckily for you, Alan, I don't own a care home. Let's move on. Owen Paterson, the Tory MP, has been found, of course, by an independent standards committee to have broken lobbying rules multiple times, I have to say. Well, for the moment, he's off the hook. Rather than voting simply on whether to accept the proposed 30-day suspension, the government today decided instead to table an amendment that basically said that they feel the system is unfair and needs changing. I've got to say, this vote was passed to lots of surprise. Well, I wasn't going to say surprise, actually, because I think it's pretty obvious given the Tory majority, but to cries of shame, shame on you, look at what you've done to this place. And I guess the accusation is surrounding what some would say marking your own homework. Lots of, if you go on social media, the words Tory sleaze is trending. Was this the right decision? Laura, I'm going to come to you on this.
Well, I don't believe in trial by media, and I don't like social media lynching. I think justice should be done properly. And actually, the problem with this is that justice was not done properly. The Commissioner, Catherine Stone, has said she'd made up her mind about Owen Paterson before she started the inquiry. And none of the 17 witnesses he put forward were interviewed. Their evidence wasn't heard. So this inquiry has really bad flaws. And the timing is unfortunate. This timing is unfortunate. Trying to change the way that you investigate misuse of lobbying while you're in it doesn't look good. But I think actually tabling these amendments is right. It's probably the right thing to do.
Well, Nikki Laura says the timing is unfortunate. Some might say the timing is damn right corrupt. All of a sudden, just as you're reaching the point where sentencing is due, I mean, it sounds a bit dramatic, but you all know what I mean, then all of a sudden, apparently, the system isn't right. Many critics would say there should have been a separation between this particular case and, indeed, the overall system itself. What's your view?
Yeah, well, it's just so very convenient, isn't it, how this has kind of come to the fore, and for ages, apparently, they've been wanting to change the system, and this is how they're going to do it. I suppose what I wonder with this, apart from all, I absolutely think this is corrupt because it's a case of the Tories literally trying to change laws to suit themselves, which they've done many times since they've been in power. But the thing about it is, how did Owen Paterson have the time to be an MP and consult for two firms at a rate of £120,000 a year on top of his 80+ K salary? Doesn't it concern us that our public servants are taking private money for something else and working effectively two jobs?
So what you're saying, you don't think they should be able to have second jobs?
I don't think they should, no.
So you think they should only do the work?
Most of the rest of, most people with an employment contract in this country are not allowed to have a second job. It's just kind of in the basic terms of that. So as a public servant, public servants shouldn't have second jobs.
Oh, Alan, your thoughts?
Well, I think the thing is that one of the things is it depends on what's actually being done, and I think that you have to have due process to see what's happened. I think it's certainly the case that there's a lot of distrust we know today around lobbying and things like that. And if you're in a position, an elected position, and then you're using that position to advocate certain things, like we have seen recently in other examples, then that's very problematic. I also think there's sometimes a lot of platitudes used about things like lobbying, big business, big this, big that. So I think it's important to get the details and the specifics. I think it's problematic that suddenly you change the rules, even though if it was planned beforehand, at the very time you try and address it. I do think that's problematic. I think that a bigger question is, I want to hold everyone to account for actually, rather than this question about lobbying and everything, is actually having transparency and honesty around political decisions they're making. I think that's a really significant, profound problem that we haven't actually dealt with properly still. And I would much rather see a conversation about why it is that we don't have enough transparency and I think, quite frankly, honesty from government and elected officials around particularly what we've seen in the last 18 months and where we're going.
Yeah, I've got to say, there was some interesting things. There was, I think it was about an hour and a half's discussion on this in Parliament today. Lots of interesting. Chris Bryant was one of the speeches that I found really interesting. Let's just have a quick listen to a clip from him. I think we've got something there.
This could have been very different if you had come to us and said, "I'm sorry, I was trying to do the right thing, but I got it wrong. I want the House to uphold the highest standards, and I accept the reprimand and the sanction. I hope my constituents will deal kindly with me. The danger is, if this amendment is carried today, his name will become a byword for bad behaviour."
Byword for bad behaviour. Jess Phillips as well. She was asking the question, would you do this? Would you think that the process was wrong if it was a Labour MP that was currently on the hook for breaching rules? Jacob Rees-Mogg says, yeah, he said that they would. Do you believe that? Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about badly behaved school children's. Who do you think is to blame for that? One of the strictest school teachers, one of the strictest head teachers, thinks that it's parents and we need some old-fashioned discipline. And I do like to end with a bit of positivity. Let's have a look. Some good news in Australia.
What a great day. We now have returned Cleo to her loving parents.
It's Mark Dolan in for Dan Wootton in The Clash. Should we ban the smacking of children? Countryfile and Springwatch star and kids TV legend Michaela Strachan is my big question guest at 10. Plus top columnist Rod Liddle on France's defeat over fishing. And are young people the biggest eco-hypocrites? And tonight's talking point, how often should you be washing your clothes? And don't miss my monologue at the start of the show. COP26 can cop right off. See you at 9.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back to Dewbs and Kerr. The strictest head teacher in Britain says that parents are to blame for the bad behaviour of school kids and that adults are apparently afraid of pupils. Barry Smith has in the past come under fire for his hardline tactics, such as branding children in detention detainees and issuing about 80 detentions a day. He sounds great. I'd get my son into his school pronto if I was a parent. But what do you reckon? Is it parents that are to blame for unruly school kids? I mean, is it parents? Is it teachers? I think it absolutely is parents. Alan?
Well, I don't think we should get into a squabble between blaming either parents or teachers, because let's take ourselves back a bit. Over the last 3 decades particularly, there's been a kind of crumbling of authority. There's been a sense that any ideas are all equally valid, the sense of a universal premise around civility, around principles of authority. We've seen it across our institutions where authority has been dwindling and diminishing. In fact, like, adults feel very thwarted and not confident in talking about authority. When I was growing up, many people in the community, neighbours, they'd say something, you'd listen to them because there was a sense that they had that support and everyone had that shared thing. In that context, parents do lots of different ways to bring up their kids, right? But authority is being corroded in every institution, so partly in academia and in education. And it's very easy to blame parents. I think the problem is we shouldn't have a war between teachers and parents. We should recognise there's this cultural backdrop, and as adults, we should advocate that everyone should hold the line and lead for children. One of the ironies of all this, I happen to have read that, what he said, and I have a lot of sympathy in it. Sometimes when people talk about discipline, they think you're talking about wielding a belt. discipline and authority is not loud and threatening. It's calm authority. It's ability for people to recognise things about how we engage. It's shared moral norms. And we've got a problem that these days people feel very difficult in advocating that and backing one another as adults. And I would just say that, unfortunately, many adults abandoned their positions during lockdown and around school kids. And I think that is very problematic. And to then to point fingers at one another, I don't think is a solution. We need to think collectively as a society, as adults, how we actually ensure that we have general norms and a moral web and authority that then children can actually see and understand, because they obviously can see in many contexts that we don't have that, and they game that a little bit with us.
Laura?
Yeah, well, as a mum of 2 teenage boys, you know, really at that time when there's all the discipline problems...
God, I don't envy you. 3 teenage boys?
No, 2.
Oh, 2.
Oh, don't do that to me.
Oh.
I think it's only 2. So just 2. But it's been an incredibly trying 18 months. I think in the last year, something like 20,000 children disappeared from school registers, and an additional 1.5 million are going to need mental health help after lockdown. I can tell you, the day that one of my sons went back to school, fights were breaking out all over the school. It's like they went kind of feral. So there's something that's going on at the moment, which isn't necessarily the teachers, it's not necessarily the parents. They've had an incredibly trying time. They had no school. Learning from home was just awful. Well done to anyone who had a great time and Forest schooled their children and it went well. I thought it was just appalling. They didn't have sport, they didn't have social life, they didn't have access to wider family. Yeah, I bet there are some discipline problems. But also, one of the schools I have experience of has gone kind of hyper strict, and that's created a lot of stress. So sometimes you can overly focus on the wrong things, like, is your shirt tucked in? Are you talking a bit loud in the corridor? Actually, these guys have had a really bad 18 months and they need to be welcomed back. And actually, like Alan says, with a kind of a calm authority and good moral values.
What do you reckon to that?
This is really interesting to me. So all my family are educators. They've all been teachers at some point, and I'm the only one that hasn't, actually. And I went to a school where there were no apparent rules. That's what we were always told. There were no detentions. There was no sending home for anything. And we all kind of came out with really good grades. So they're... I don't know what the reverse psychology that they were operating, that they inspired us to be well-behaved and they didn't tell us what to do. We decided to choose to be that, actually worked. So I don't necessarily think you have to be hardline all the time to get the results that you want. The other thing I would say is, if all these standards are diminishing, wouldn't crime have gone up so much as a result of people having no discipline? That's not actually what's happened. Well, it's certainly not what the Tories have said has happened in the past 10 years.
Well, I'm the opposite, I think. I've got a 1-year-old, and when we picked him up from nursery the other day, the worker, she said, oh, you know, there's been a bit of an accident, here's this form. And it was so nonchalant, here's this form. Well, what's the accident? Someone's bit your kid. So my kid had this circle, like proper bite mark on his eye socket where this other kid had bit him. My instinct, my initial reaction was, well, what did you do to the kid that's bit him? And the woman was like, sorry. I was like, well, how are you going to discipline him? And the woman was like, well, he's won. And I was like, he's bit my child. And the teacher was looking at me as though like I was like this really oddball for wanting a 1-year-old to be disciplined. Maybe I was, I don't know. Anyway, I found the email that I was searching for. Carly says, I'm an unvaccinated care worker and my reasons are many. She says there are no long-term studies and I've seen a lot of illness with people who have had the vaccine. The people testing positive, many of them are double vaccinated. It doesn't make any sense to her, and what she's saying is it makes me indeed more hesitant. Carly goes on to say that I hope all of those that are saying we are hypocrites will be there ready with their own PPE on, helping out this winter then. Care homes are already struggling. Why don't you go and sign up for the 13-hour shifts, often with no breaks, trying to comfort the sick, elderly, confused. They will need you. Back up the talk, she says. Thank you for that, Carly. I want to talk about some positive news as well in just a moment. You might have seen this. A 4-year-old girl missing for 18 days in a remote part of Western Australia has been found alive and well in a locked house. Cleo Smith disappeared from her family's tent at a campsite near the town of Carnarvon on the 16th of October. Of course, this triggered a massive search. A 36-year-old man is in custody and being questioned by detectives. Now, I've got to be honest, when I read this story, it made me cry this morning. Looked at that little girl, and you know what? There's so much ill in the world, there's so much bad stuff in the world, and yes, okay, we can all talk about what the police could do differently here, there and everywhere, but I just thought, wow, for those parents, 18 days of not knowing where your little girl is, and then you get her back, Nikki.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to take your hats off to the Western Australian police, because they've just kind of gone beyond, haven't they, to get her back. It was a really difficult case. I know that she was on a campsite, it was very remote. I just think, yeah, it is good to see good news, and it's very reassuring to us to see that the authorities care deeply. They can, go to the ends of the earth to track someone down, and this is a result of it. So, yeah, it's a great story.
It was lovely. It made me very happy. I know you're itching to say something, aren't you, about...
Was I?
I don't know. I thought you looked like you were itching. But
it was a really lovely story. It's one of those...
Don't do a but, will you? Because I want to end on a nice happy...
What I'm going to say is, for those parents, their life will always be before and after.
Yeah.
And after this, they'll have a perspective in life that nothing else can ever give you. It was a good news story. It's lovely. I had a little wobble when I read it too. You don't put your heart in your mouth. It's every parent's worst nightmare. And then, what a wonderful result for them at the end.
Yeah, well, never lose hope. But there are so many children that go missing as well, aren't there, that don't have this very happy ending, which is why I think for me as well, when I saw this, I was just like, oh, thank goodness.
It's a remarkable story. I mean, usually they say, don't they say 24 hours, 48 hours. After that, you really... it's unbearable to think about what anyone goes through when a situation like that happens, and it's just a beautiful story. Everyone put all their resources in to really deliver something fantastic at the end of the day. It's not a but. There is a situation in other parts of Australia where we've seen things like martial law and real impositions on people. So this is a lovely, lovely story that can bring us some hope that something truly wonderful has happened and a beautiful life has been sort of saved, and that's fantastic.
Well, it is, isn't it? Just such a lovely little way to end the show. We're almost done for tonight, but Ryan has been in touch and he says, I quote, yippee, he says, I'm so happy that Owen Paterson has been cleared. Well, I'm not sure he's been cleared quite yet. I'm sure he'll have to go through a different process. We just don't know what that process will be. Derek says, members of Parliament shouldn't be allowed to have secondary jobs if they can't live on their salaries and expenses. Then there is something fundamentally wrong, he says, with their lifestyle. It may also concentrate their minds on their parliamentary role if they didn't have that second job. Susan says Owen Paterson didn't have a fair inquiry, but MPs of all parties chase the cash, she says, and I think, got to be right, yes, indeed they do. Lots of you, and I mean lots of you, are getting in contact about this vaccination, whether you should have it as care workers or not. Still some people coming in saying that if you work in that industry, yes, you should. But I have to say the overwhelming majority of you that seem to be writing in are very anti-mandation. And I always say that word mandation. I know it's not a proper word, but you know what I mean, the mandating of vaccines. A few people as well have been in touch to say thank you for showing footage of the protests. People don't seem to. You're quite right. No, they don't seem to. And it's very bizarre, isn't it? Anyway, that's pretty much all we've got time for. I've had a nice show tonight. Laura, Alan, going to split you two up next time, I think. They talk. You want to know how much they talk in the break, these two. Nikki, thank you as well. I love the sound of your school, by the way. A school with no rules. I think I'm a little bit too strict, though, to put my son into one of those. Anyway, Langers has been in contact saying, brilliant show tonight. You were all superb and very eloquent, he says. There you go. What a compliment. That's it for us. I'll see you tomorrow, 6 o'clock till 7 o'clock. Have yourself a very good evening.
Hello again. Clearing skies overnight will lead to a frost in places by Thursday morning. But despite the chilly start, plenty of sunshine throughout the day for many places. Not for all, though. We've still got a northerly wind across the country, high pressure to the west, and that northerly wind continues to feed some cloud and showers into mainly coastal parts of eastern England, as well as western England and West Wales. The showers in the north of Scotland, Northern Ireland, tending to ease away overnight, and inland clearing skies will lead to those plummeting temperatures. We're looking at temperatures dropping to 3 to 6 Celsius generally, but in sheltered parts of England, Wales and southern and central Scotland, a few degrees below freezing possible first thing Thursday. But a bright start for many, plenty of sunshine. I think sunnier skies for central and southern England compared to what we saw through Wednesday. Still some showers feeding into the North Sea coast. and West Wales as well as Cornwall. But on the whole, fewer showers compared to recent days, more sunshine and more pleasant feel. But still a gusty, cold wind, and the temperatures a little below average for the time of year, 8 to 11 Celsius. Some cloud then spills into the north and northwest of Scotland on Thursday night. That then eventually reaches Northern Ireland and southern Scotland by midnight. With that cloud, temperatures will hold up in the north, but further south, clear skies and lighter wind will lead to a more widespread frost. Lower temperatures as well, as low as -3 Celsius, I think, in some sheltered spots first thing Friday. But you can see the clear blue skies there across much of the south on Friday, and it stays largely sunny in the south throughout much of the day. But thicker cloud feeds into the north and more especially the northwest, where there will be some light outbreaks of rain. More unsettled weather in the northwest through the weekend, drier further south and turning a little milder for all of us.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.